Life had painted Jack Miller into a corner. Each morning brought the same struggle, keeping his rundown garage alive while raising a young daughter alone. But fate has a way of shifting gears when you least expect it. When a gleaming red Ferrari rolled into his shop, its engine whispering defeat, he never imagined it would lead to an invitation that would change everything. Elizabeth Morgan, the powerhouse CEO behind the wheel, came expecting a quick fix. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by the quiet confidence of a man who could make engines sing. Her offer was as unexpected as it was irresistible. Join her on a cross-country drive in the very Ferrari he just restored. Could this unlikely journey prove that sometimes the greatest distances aren't measured in miles, but in the space between two hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather of Jack Miller's tool belt creaked as he bent over the engine of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Volvo. His father's initials, TM, were still visible on the worn leather, though the tools themselves had been replaced countless times over. The years. The belt was more than just an inheritance. It was a reminder of everything his father had taught him about engines, about life, and about never giving up. Dawn light filtered through the garage's grimy windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Jack had been here since 5, trying to get ahead of the day's workload. The quiet hours before Emma woke were his only chance to tackle the mounting pile of bills that threatened to overwhelm his small business. "Daddy," Emma's voice echoed through the garage, still carrying traces of sleep. Jack straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. His 8-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, connecting the garage to their modest apartment, her school backpack already slung over one shoulder, brown hair escaping from hastily tied pigtails. "Hey, sweetheart, you're up early." He glanced at his watch, 6:45 a.m. Emma had been waking herself up lately, setting her own alarm. It broke his heart a little, seeing her grow so independent out of necessity rather than choice. "I made breakfast," she announced proudly. "Toast isn't burned this time." Jack smiled, though his chest tightened. No child should have to learn to cook their own breakfast at 8. Since Catherine's passing 3 years ago, he'd done his best to be both mother and father. But some days, the gap felt impossible to bridge. "That's my girl." He followed her into their small kitchen, where 2 plates of slightly uneven toast sat waiting. "Perfect timing. Mrs. Henderson's car can wait while I have breakfast with my favorite mechanic in training." Emma beamed at the title, settling into her usual chair. The kitchen was cramped but clean, with faded yellow curtains Catherine had picked out still hanging in the window. Jack had never had the heart to change them. "Did you fix Mr. Rodriguez's truck?" Emma asked, spreading jam on her toast with careful concentration. "Almost. Need a new part that's coming in today." Jack didn't mention that Mr. Rodriguez could barely afford the repairs, or that he'd agreed to a payment plan that would barely cover the cost of parts. It was the 3rd such arrangement this month. "Is that why you were looking at the calculator last night? The one that made you sigh?" Sometimes Emma was too perceptive for her own good. Jack reached across the table to smooth the stray hair behind her ear. "Just grown-up stuff, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. The garage's accounts were bleeding red ink. 2 major chains had opened up across town, drawing away his regular customers with flashy promotions and corporate pricing he couldn't hope to match. The only thing keeping Miller's Auto Repair afloat was his reputation for quality work and his willingness to help people down on their luck, a kindness his bank account couldn't really afford. The morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Emma gathered her school things while Jack packed her lunch: peanut butter and jelly, an apple, and one of the chocolate chip cookies Mrs. Henderson had brought over yesterday. Their elderly neighbor might not have much money, but she never forgot that Emma had a sweet tooth. "Bus is coming," Emma announced, peering out the window. She turned and hugged him tight around the waist, her face pressed against his work shirt. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, sweetheart. Have a good day at school." He watched from the doorway as she joined the small group of children at the bus stop, her pink backpack bobbing among the others. Only when the bus pulled away did he allow his smile to fade. Back in the garage, Jack returned to Mrs. Henderson's Volvo. The morning light had strengthened, highlighting the wear on his tools, the cracks in the concrete floor, the places where rust was beginning to show through the metal shelving. Everything needed updating, but updates required capital he didn't have. The radio played softly in the background, an old country station his father had always favored. Johnny Cash was singing about walking the line when the sound of an approaching engine cut through the familiar melody. It was a sound that made Jack's trained ear perk up, something Italian, expensive, and not running quite right. He stepped out into the morning sun, squinting against the glare. The sight that greeted him would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. A Ferrari 488 GTB, red as sin and worth more than his garage and house combined, was pulling into his lot. The engine's purr had a slight catch to it, a whisper of something not quite right that probably only a trained ear would notice. As Jack watched, the car rolled to a stop, and the driver's door opened with elegant precision. The woman who stepped out looked as expensive as her car. Tailored suit, perfectly styled hair, the kind of confidence that came from moving through a world that bent to your will. She surveyed the garage with an expression Jack had seen before, on the faces of people who'd taken a wrong turn and found themselves in what they considered the wrong part of town. But there was something else in her face too, a flash of worry when the engine coughed slightly as she turned it off. In that moment, she wasn't a CEO or a wealthy stranger. She was just someone with a sick car, looking for help. Jack straightened his shoulders, adjusted his father's tool belt, and stepped forward to meet whatever opportunities or challenges this morning had brought his way. Elizabeth Morgan checked her Cartier watch, a habit born of 20 years in corporate boardrooms where every minute was currency. The delicate hands showed 7:30 a.m., and she was already behind schedule. The board meeting in San Francisco wouldn't wait, even for the CEO of Morgan Technologies. She hadn't planned on her Ferrari developing this worrying flutter somewhere between Sacramento and this small town she'd never heard of. "I spotted your garage from the highway," she said, her tone matching the crisp lines of her charcoal suit. "The sign said you're open." Jack nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the incongruity of a $250,000 car in his modest workspace. "Just opened. What seems to be the problem?" Elizabeth's manicured fingers traced the Ferrari's flawless paint. "There's a slight hesitation when I accelerate. Most people wouldn't notice, but you know your car," Jack finished. He was already moving around the vehicle, his experienced eye taking in details most would miss. "Mind starting her up?" Elizabeth slid back into the driver's seat, the leather accepting her like an old friend. The engine purred to life, but Jack caught it immediately. That slight catch, a whisper of imperfection in the symphony of precision engineering. "How long has it been doing that?" he asked, leaning in to listen more closely. "Started about 50 miles back." Elizabeth glanced at her watch again. The morning sun caught its face, sending a brief flash of light across the garage wall. "I have a meeting in San Francisco this afternoon. I don't suppose this is a quick fix." Jack straightened up, wiping his hands on his work rag. "Could be the fuel injection system. Won't know for sure until I get a better look. But Ms. Morgan. Elizabeth Morgan. Ms. Morgan, this isn't the kind of car you want to take chances with. If I'm right about the problem, driving it further could cause serious damage." She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. The sound echoed off the walls, so out of place among the tools and engine parts. "How long?" "To diagnose." "An hour. To fix it properly." "Depends what we find." Elizabeth paced a small circle, one hand absently touching her watch, a gesture Jack suspected was as unconscious as his habit of adjusting his tool belt. Her other hand pulled out a smartphone that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "I don't suppose there's a luxury car service in town, or a rental agency that might have something suitable." The slight pause suggested she was already anticipating his answer. Closest rental place is 40 miles away. They mostly handle pickup trucks and family sedans. Jack hesitated, then added, I could give you a ride to the bus station. There's an express to Sacramento every couple hours. The look she gave him suggested she hadn't taken a bus since college. If then. She glanced at her watch again, and Jack noticed it wasn't just expensive. It was an antique, the kind of timepiece that told more than just hours and minutes. That was my father's watch, she said, catching his look. He wore it to every board meeting for 30 years, said it reminded him that time was the one thing money couldn't buy more of. A small smile softened her features. He'd probably appreciate the irony of my current situation. Something in her voice shifted, becoming more human. Jack recognized it. The way people sometimes let their guard down in garages, as if admitting their car's vulnerability made it safer to admit their own. Tell you what, he said, moving to his workbench. Let me take a quick look. Maybe it's simpler than I thought. Elizabeth watched as he gathered his tools, her attention sharp and assessing. You work on Ferraris often? Not often, Jack admitted. But an engine's an engine. The principles don't change just because the price tag has more zeros. He popped the hood, and despite the circumstances, couldn't help but smile. It was like looking at the mechanical equivalent of a Stradivarius, pure engineering artistry. But even masterpieces could hit a sour note. Beautiful, he murmured, more to himself than to Elizabeth. She moved closer, her initial skepticism giving way to curiosity. You actually mean that? Most mechanics I've dealt with just see dollar signs. My father taught me to respect every car that comes through these doors. Said it doesn't matter. If it's a Ferrari or a Fiat, someone trusted you with something important to them. That trust matters more than the price tag. Jack's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking connections, testing responses. Elizabeth stayed nearby, her watch occasionally catching the light. He noticed she'd stopped checking it quite so often. There, he said after 20 minutes. Found your problem. Fuel injector's starting to fail. It's not critical yet, but it needs to be replaced before it causes bigger issues. How long to fix it? I can have the part here in 2 hours. Installation will take another hour, maybe less. He straightened up, meeting her eyes directly. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. Elizabeth looked at her watch one final time, then surprised him by slipping it off her wrist and into her purse. Sometimes the universe has its own schedule. I'll call and reschedule the meeting. She pulled out her phone again, then paused. Is there anywhere in walking distance where I can get a decent cup of coffee? Define decent, Jack smiled slightly. There's a diner 2 blocks down. Their coffee's not Italian, but it's honest. Honest coffee, Elizabeth repeated as if testing the concept. That sounds refreshing, actually. Thank you, Mr. Miller, Jack Miller. Thank you, Jack. She started toward the door, then turned back. This is probably an odd question, but would you join me? When you're at a point where you can take a break, I'd appreciate your insight into a few things about the car's maintenance. Jack glanced at Mrs. Henderson's Volvo, still waiting patiently for its own repairs. But something in Elizabeth's expression, a mixture of authority and uncertainty, as if she wasn't used to asking rather than telling, made him nod. Give me 30 minutes to wrap up what I'm doing here. The diner's just past the bookstore, can't miss it. After she left, Jack stood for a moment in the quiet garage, the morning sun streaming through the windows and catching the dust motes in its beam. His father used to say that opportunity sometimes wore strange disguises. Looking at the Ferrari gleaming in his worn garage, Jack wondered what kind of opportunity this day might bring. Ruby's Diner hadn't changed its decor since 1985, and that suited Jack just fine. The vinyl booths were worn but clean, the coffee was strong, and the morning regulars knew better than to give him more than a curious glance as he slid into the booth across from Elizabeth Morgan. She had claimed a corner table with a view of Main Street, her laptop open but forgotten as she traced a line across a map spread between their coffee cups. Not a Google map or a GPS screen, but an actual paper. Road atlas, the kind Jack hadn't seen since smartphones took over the world. I highlighted the scenic route, Elizabeth said without preamble, her finger following a winding blue line from their small town all the way to San Francisco. It adds about 6 hours to the trip, but it takes you through some of the most beautiful parts of the state. Jack wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, letting the warmth seep into fingers, still slightly grimed with Ferrari engine oil. Scenic route? I've been thinking. She sat back, studying him with the same intensity she'd shown his work on her car. You know Ferraris. More importantly, you understand them. Do you know how rare that is? I know it's not the kind of car I usually work on. Exactly. Elizabeth leaned forward, her corporate demeanor softening into something more animated. Which is why I have a proposition for you. Drive with me to San Francisco. Jack nearly choked on his coffee. Excuse me? The car needs a skilled mechanic. For the journey, just in case. But it's more than that. She tapped the map. This car was meant for roads like these, not just commuting between board meetings. When I bought it, I promised myself I'd really drive it someday, really experience it. And that someday is today? Life has a way of always pushing someday into tomorrow, until suddenly you're 52, running a company your father built, and you realize you've forgotten how to do anything just for the joy of it. She smiled, a hint of self-deprecation in her expression. Maybe I'm having a midlife crisis, or maybe I'm finally getting wise enough to seize an opportunity when I see one. Jack studied the map, his mind already calculating distances, fuel stops, potential issues. It's a generous offer, but I have responsibilities here. The garage will still be here in 3 days. I'll compensate you for your time, of course. Well above your usual rates. It's not just the garage. Jack thought of Emma, of breakfast made by small hands, of the trust in her eyes when she hugged him goodbye each morning. Understanding flickered across Elizabeth's face. The little girl in the photo on your workbench, your daughter, Emma. She's 8. Elizabeth nodded, processing this information with what Jack suspected was her business acumen kicking in. She could stay with family, friends. I'll cover any childcare costs naturally. Jack's sister Sarah had been asking to have Emma for a visit. She lived an hour away, taught elementary school, and always made time for her niece despite her busy schedule, but still. Why me? He asked finally. You could hire a professional driver, a specialist mechanic. Because when you looked at my car, you saw more than just an expensive machine. You saw what it could be. Elizabeth's fingers traced the Atlas's legend absently. My father used to say you can tell everything you need to know about a person by how they handle 3 things: power tools, fine wine, and other people's trust. And I passed the power tools test with flying colors. She smiled, then grew serious. Look, I know it's an unusual request, but sometimes the best decisions I've made have been the ones that seemed crazy at first glance. Jack's eyes returned to the map. The route she'd marked wound through mountains and valleys he'd only seen in pictures. Roads that would make that. Ferrari sing, and the money she was offering would cover more than just a few overdue bills. I'd need to make some calls, he said slowly. Check with my sister about Emma. Make arrangements for the garage. Of course. Elizabeth reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. Not the standard corporate one she probably handed out at meetings, but a personal one, heavy cream-colored stock with just her name and private number. Take an hour. Think it over. Call me when you decide. She stood, gathering her laptop, but leaving the map on the table. The part for the car should be here soon. Whatever you decide about the trip, I trust you to handle the repairs. After she left, Jack sat for a long time, looking at the blue line running across the map like a river of possibilities. He thought about Emma's face this morning, about bills piling up on his desk, about the way his father's voice still echoed in his head. Sometimes opportunity knocks wearing overalls, son. Don't be too proud to answer the door. Finally, he pulled out his phone and dialed his sister's number. Sarah picked up on the second ring, her cheerful voice familiar and reassuring. Hey, sis, he said, fingers tracing the route on the map. Remember how you've been saying Emma needs a change of scenery? How would you feel about having her for a few days? Something's come up, something unexpected." As he explained the situation, Jack watched through the diner's window as the morning sun climbed higher, casting new light on the familiar streets of his small town. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, a long, lonesome call that seemed to echo his own yearning for something he hadn't even known he was missing until today. The world, he realized, felt suddenly larger than it had at breakfast, full of possibilities that hadn't existed when he'd started Mrs. Henderson's Volvo this morning. Now he just had to decide if he was brave enough, or maybe foolish enough, to chase them. Emma took the news better than Jack expected. She sat at their small kitchen table, legs swinging, as he explained about the Ferrari, the journey, and the stay with Aunt Sarah. Her face lit up at the mention of her aunt, though her eyes held. Questions too mature for her 8 years. "Is it because of the bills, Daddy?" she asked, cutting straight to the heart of things, the way children sometimes do. Jack knelt beside her chair. "No, sweetheart. Well, not just that. Sometimes adults need adventures too." Emma considered this, then slid off her chair and ran to her room. She returned with her art supplies, settling back at the table with determined focus. "I'm making you a card for your trip." While she worked, Jack moved through the apartment, packing a small bag. He called Jerry, the semi-retired mechanic who sometimes helped during busy periods, arranging coverage for his regular customers. Mrs. Henderson's Volvo would have to wait a few days, but she'd understand. She always did. Elizabeth's Ferrari purred contentedly in the garage, the new fuel injector installed and tested. The repair had gone smoothly, as if the car itself approved of the journey ahead. Jack found himself running his hand along its flawless finish, trying to grasp the reality of what he'd agreed to. "Mr. Miller?" Elizabeth's voice caught him mid-reverie. She changed from her business suit into elegant traveling clothes, expensive but practical, like everything else about her. "Is everything arranged?" "Just about. My sister's on her way to pick up Emma. The garage is covered." He gestured. "To the Ferrari. She's ready to go when you are." Elizabeth nodded, then hesitated. "I realize I may have been presumptuous suggesting this trip. If you've had second thoughts—" "Daddy!" Emma's voice interrupted as she burst into the garage, proudly holding up her finished card. "Look what I made!" The card was a masterpiece of third-grade art, a red car, surprisingly well drawn, driving through mountains made of triangles with 2 stick figures visible through the windows. Glitter outlined the whole scene, and inside, Emma's careful handwriting. "Read, 'Come back soon, Daddy. Have a good adventure.'" Jack felt his throat tighten as he took the card. Elizabeth stepped closer, smiling at the artwork. "You're quite the artist," she told Emma. "Those mountains look just like the ones we'll be driving through." Emma beamed at the praise, then turned serious. "You'll take care of my daddy?" Something flickered in Elizabeth's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps at being handed this small but weighty responsibility. "I promise," she said solemnly. Sarah arrived soon after, her teacher's sedan a stark contrast to the Ferrari. She hugged Jack tight, whispering, "About time you did something unexpected," before gathering Emma and her overnight bag. As they drove away, Emma waving from the back window, Jack carefully tucked her card into his jacket pocket next to his heart. When he turned back to the garage, Elizabeth was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Ready?" she asked simply. Jack took one last look at his familiar world. The worn tools, the oil-stained floor, the faded sign above, the door that still bore his father's handwriting. Then he nodded, picking up his small bag. "Ready?" The Ferrari's door opened with a precise click, and as Jack settled into the passenger seat, the leather seemed to welcome him. Elizabeth started the engine, and its purr filled the garage with a promise. Dawn was just breaking as they pulled out onto the empty street, the car's headlights cutting through the lingering darkness. In his pocket, Emma's card crinkled softly, a reminder of what he was leaving behind and what he was driving toward. The first hour passed in silence, broken only by the Ferrari's engine and the occasional guidance from Elizabeth's GPS. The morning sun painted the highway in shades of gold, but the space between driver and passenger remained heavy with unspoken questions. Elizabeth drove with the same precision she probably applied to corporate takeovers, each gear change perfect, each curve handled with expertise. Yet Jack noticed her fingers occasionally straying to the radio controls, then withdrawing, as if unsure about breaking their careful quiet. Finally, she spoke. "I suppose we should get to know each other, considering we'll be sharing the next few days. What would you like to know? How does someone in a small-town garage learn to work?" "On Ferraris?" Jack smiled slightly. "Same way you learn anything worthwhile. Study, practice, and a healthy respect for what you don't know." He paused, then added, "My father believed in being prepared for any opportunity. He subscribed to every automotive journal he could afford, kept certification courses running on our ancient computer. Knowledge doesn't care about zip codes." Elizabeth nodded, processing this. Her hand moved to the radio again, and this time she pressed the power button. The car's premium sound system came alive, but instead of the expected business news or classical music, it was tuned to a station playing vintage rock. "Surprised?" she asked, catching his look. "I'm not always CNBC and Mozart." The Rolling Stones filled the cabin, and something in the atmosphere shifted. Elizabeth's shoulders relaxed slightly, her grip on the steering wheel becoming less precise, more natural. "My father had an old Grundig radio in his study," she said, eyes on the road ahead. "He'd tune into rock stations while reviewing contracts. Said it helped him think outside the corporate box." A small smile played at her lips. The board members hated hearing Mick Jagger through the walls during budget meetings. "Sounds like an interesting man." He was. Built the company from nothing, but never forgot where he came from. She glanced at Jack. "He would have liked your garage, the real places he called them, where things get fixed instead of just replaced." The highway curved into mountain country, and Elizabeth downshifted smoothly, the Ferrari responding like a thoroughbred. Jack felt the perfect balance of the car, the way it seemed to read its driver's intentions before she even moved. "You handle her well," he observed. "Thank you, though I suspect she's running better than ever after your work." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, then added, "I bought her after my father died. The board thought it was a midlife crisis. Maybe they were right." "Nothing wrong with midlife clarity," Jack said, surprising himself with the words. Elizabeth laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to brighten the car's interior. "Clarity? Is that what this is? Running away from a board meeting to drive across the state with a stranger? Sometimes running away and running toward look the same at the start." The radio shifted to a Beatles song, "The Long and Winding Road," its melody weaving through their conversation like a knowing commentary. They passed a sign indicating a scenic overlook ahead, and without discussion, Elizabeth guided the Ferrari onto the exit. They pulled into a viewpoint that opened onto a valley painted in morning mist, the road they'd traveled visible as a ribbon. Below, Elizabeth turned off the engine but left the radio playing softly. "I have a confession," she said. "I almost didn't pull into your garage, almost called my usual dealer instead." "What stopped you?" "The sign, Miller & Son Auto Repair. It reminded me of my father's first business sign. Before Morgan Technologies, before the IPO, when he was just a man with a dream and a talent." She turned to face Jack. "Thank you, by the way, for coming on this, whatever this is, adventure," Jack said, remembering Emma's card. "I believe that's what we're calling it." The Beatles faded into a Fleetwood Mac song, and they sat there for a moment, two people from different worlds, sharing a view and a snippet of music from the past. The silence between them now felt comfortable, full of possibility rather than awkwardness. When they pulled back onto the highway, the sun was higher, the day warming up, and something had shifted in the Ferrari's cabin. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. By mid-afternoon, they'd left the highway for smaller roads that wound through old mining towns. The Ferrari drew stares from locals unused to such machinery, growling past their vintage storefronts, but Elizabeth seemed oblivious to the attention. She was too busy listening to Jack explain the finer points of engine timing. "So, you're saying even a fraction of a second matters?" she asked, genuinely interested. "In engines, like in business, timing is everything." Jack caught himself. "Not that I'm presuming to know about your world." "Why not? You've already proven you understand more than most." Elizabeth slowed as they entered another small town, this one barely more than a main street with a cluster of shops. "Mind if we stretch our legs? There's a bookstore that looks interesting." The store was one of those endangered species of retail, a family-owned shop that had somehow survived the digital age. Books towered in precarious stacks, their spines faded by sunlight from the dusty windows. A bell tinkled above the door as they entered. "Reminds me of where I used to hide during lunch breaks in high school," Jack said, inhaling the familiar scent of old paper and forgotten stories. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as the hiding type." "I was different then. Skinny kid who preferred books to football." He ran a finger along a shelf. "My mother used to say I was born 40 years old. Always too serious, too focused on responsibilities. And now I'm actually 40, with real responsibilities." He smiled slightly. "Life has a sense of humor." They wandered deeper into the store, eventually separating to browse different sections. Jack found himself in photography, leafing through a book of classic cars when Elizabeth's voice called him over. "Look at this," she said, holding out a large leather-bound volume. The cover was worn smooth by time and handling, its pages thick with black and white photographs of America's great roads, Route 66, the Pacific Coast Highway, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Each image captured a moment in time when the journey mattered, more than the destination. "It's a first edition," Elizabeth said, her fingers tracing the photographer's signature. "From 1962. My father had this same book in his library. He used to show me the pictures, tell me stories about roads he'd driven. In his youth." Jack studied a photograph of a convertible crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, the car's occupants frozen in eternal optimism. "We don't take Sunday drives anymore, do we? Everyone's always rushing somewhere." "Like me this morning." Elizabeth's voice held a note of revelation. "I was so focused on getting to that meeting. And now?" She closed the book carefully, but didn't return it to the shelf. "Now I'm beginning to think the universe knew what it was doing when my car developed. That problem." She paused. "Would you think I was crazy if I bought this book? Not for my office, but for the journey," Jack finished. "I think that's exactly what it's meant for." The elderly shopkeeper wrapped the book in brown paper, tying it with string, as if online shopping had never been invented. When Elizabeth reached for her credit card, Jack noticed her corporate efficiency falter, as if she too was enjoying this step back in time. Back in the car, the wrapped book sat between them like a shared secret. Elizabeth started the engine, but didn't immediately. "Pull away." "I haven't done anything spontaneous in years," she said quietly. "Every decision carefully weighed, every action analyzed for its impact on stock prices and shareholder confidence." "Sounds lonely." "It is. Was." She glanced at him. "The funny thing is, I never noticed how lonely until today, until normal conversations about engines and books and memories started feeling more real than board meetings ever did." Jack thought about his own routine, the careful calculations of each day's repairs, each month's bills. We all get stuck sometimes. The trick is recognizing when it's happening. Elizabeth put the car in gear, but her next word suggested she was driving toward more than just their destination. "Tell me about your daughter, Emma. What's her favorite book?" As they pulled away from the bookstore, Jack found himself sharing stories about Emma's latest literary obsession, a series about a young girl who could talk to machines. Elizabeth listened, really listened, asking questions that suggested she saw Emma as a person, not just a detail to be noted. The afternoon light softened around them, and the Ferrari purred along roads that felt increasingly like paths to possibility, rather than mere pavement. The wrapped book between them seemed to pulse with potential, like a compass pointing toward something neither of them had known they were seeking. The storm came out of nowhere, the way mountain weather often does. One moment they were driving under scattered clouds, the next they were engulfed in a curtain of rain so thick the wipers could barely keep up. "There's a turn-off ahead," Jack said, studying the GPS. "Small town called Pine Ridge. We should wait this out." Elizabeth nodded, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The Ferrari, for all its precision engineering, wasn't designed for these conditions. They found the exit just as the first rumble of thunder shook the air. The town's main street ended at a small motel, its vacancy sign flickering in the growing darkness. Elizabeth guided the car into the covered parking just as the storm hit full force, bringing with it marble-sized hail. "Good timing," she said, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Though I'm guessing this isn't in our itinerary. Sometimes the best parts of a journey aren't in the plan." The motel office was empty, except for an elderly clerk who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as he handed them keys to the last two available rooms. The power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Jack reached into his bag and pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting through the sudden darkness. The clerk seemed unsurprised by the outage, simply reaching under the counter for a handful of emergency candles. "Happens every big storm," he said, finally looking up. "Generator'll kick in for the essentials, but you folks might want to grab some dinner from the diner across the street before their kitchen closes." They made a dash for it through the rain, Jack's flashlight leading the way. The diner was running on generator power, its windows glowing warm and inviting against the storm's fury. Inside, it was like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting, red, vinyl booths, chrome fixtures, and the smell of coffee and pie. "When was the last time you ate in a place like this?" Jack asked, as they settled into a booth. Elizabeth looked around, taking in the handwritten specials board and the local photos on the walls. "Honestly, I can't remember. My meals usually involve expense accounts and wine lists." Their loss. Jack ordered coffee for both of them and on impulse added 2 slices of apple pie. As they ate, the storm raged outside, but in their booth, surrounded by the muted conversations of other stranded travelers, something shifted. Elizabeth told him about her first job out of business school, working in her father's mailroom despite her MBA. Jack shared stories about learning to be a single parent, about tea parties with Emma, and learning to braid hair from YouTube tutorials. The flashlight sat on the table between them, its beam creating a small circle of light that seemed to encourage confidences. "I haven't told anyone this," Elizabeth said, pushing her empty pie plate aside. "But I've been thinking of stepping down as CEO. Why? Because days like today remind me there's more to life than quarterly reports." She traced a pattern in the condensation on her water glass. "My father built the company to create something meaningful, not just profitable. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that." Thunder crashed outside, and the lights flickered again. Jack's flashlight beam remained steady, reliable. "You know what Emma said this morning?" he asked. "She said sometimes adults need adventures too. Out of the mouths of babes, right?" Elizabeth smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Smart girl. She'd get that from her mother." "Catherine was brilliant," Jack said softly. "She taught literature at the community college. Always said the best stories happen when people leave their comfort zones. Like driving through a storm with a stranger." "We're not exactly strangers anymore, are we?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Outside, the storm began to ease, but neither of them moved to leave. The flashlight's beam created shadows that danced across their faces, making the moment feel somehow both real and dreamlike. Sometimes, Jack realized, it takes the dark to help you see things clearly. Morning found them in the motel's small breakfast room, sharing coffee that was surprisingly good for a place that still used paper guest ledgers. The storm had passed, leaving behind air so clear it made the mountains seem close enough to touch. Elizabeth's laptop chimed with an incoming email, the corporate world intruding on their quiet moment. Her expression changed as she read, CEO mask sliding back into place. Problem? Jack asked, recognizing the shift in her demeanor. Production. Issue at our Sacramento plant. They're trying to roll out a new automated assembly line, but something's not calibrating correctly. She rubbed her temples. The project manager's requesting an emergency video call. Mind if I ask what they're trying to automate? Electric vehicle charging stations. We're expanding into the green energy sector. Elizabeth's fingers flew across the keyboard as she replied to messages. The robotic arms keep misaligning during the final assembly phase. Jack sipped his coffee, considering. Sounds like a timing issue. Elizabeth looked up, surprised. What do you mean? In engines, when something's misaligned, it's usually because the timing's off. Different parts moving at slightly different speeds, fighting each other instead of working together. He shrugged. Machines are machines, whether they're building things or powering cars. Elizabeth studied him for a moment, then turned her laptop so they could both see the screen. The video call starts in 5 minutes. Would you mind sitting in, just to observe? The call connected to a harried-looking project manager named David, who barely concealed his skepticism when Elizabeth introduced Jack as a consulting engineer. But as the team walked through the technical issues, Jack's quiet questions began to shift the conversation. "Show me the arm's movement again," he requested, leaning closer to the screen. "There. See how it hesitates? Like a cylinder. Misfiring." The plant engineer's eyes widened. He's right. The servos are slightly out of sync. Like an engine running rough, Jack explained. You need all the cylinders firing in perfect sequence. Your robots need the same thing, perfect coordination. For the next hour, Jack translated between the mechanical world he knew and the high-tech environment of Morgan Technologies. His practical understanding of timing and mechanical harmony helped the team identify not just the problem, but an elegant solution. When the call ended, Elizabeth sat back, looking at Jack with new appreciation. "You just saved us weeks of delays and probably millions in lost production. Just applied the basics. Machines want to work right. You just have to listen to what... And they're telling you. That's exactly what my father used to say about business." Elizabeth closed her laptop slowly. "He believed in understanding things from the ground up. Said you can't lead what you don't understand. Wise man." "Yes, he was." She paused, then added, "The board thinks I'm too much like him sometimes, too hands-on, too interested in the details. They want me to focus on strategy, leave the practical stuff to others. And what do you want?" "I want..." She traced the edge of her laptop, the sleek device suddenly seeming like a barrier between two worlds. "I want to feel this way more. Often, like I just solved a real problem, helped make something work better. Most days I just move numbers around spreadsheets." Jack thought about his own work, the satisfaction of fixing things, of knowing that every car that left his garage worked better than when it arrived. "Maybe that's what your father understood, that real value comes from understanding how things work, not just how to profit from them." Elizabeth's phone buzzed, another corporate crisis demanding attention, but this time she didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she looked out the window at the mountains, their peaks sharp against the morning sky. "We should get going," she said finally. "But Jack, thank you, not just for the help with the plant, but for reminding me what it feels like to solve real problems." As they packed up their few belongings and headed for the Ferrari, Jack noticed that Elizabeth left her laptop in its bag, rather than setting it up in the passenger seat as she had yesterday. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest changes start with the smallest decisions. The mountain air was cool and fresh as they pulled out of the motel parking lot, carrying with it the promise of more discoveries ahead. They found a quiet spot for lunch beside a mountain lake, the Ferrari's red reflection shimmering on the water's surface. Elizabeth had surprised Jack by suggesting they pick up sandwiches from a local deli rather than finding an upscale restaurant. "My father would have loved this," she said, sitting on a fallen log that nature had worn smooth. "He used to take me on impromptu picnics when I was young, drive us somewhere beautiful just to eat sandwiches and skip stones." What happened to those picnics? Board meetings, quarterly reports, the endless cycle of corporate life. She watched as Jack skipped a stone across the lake's surface. "Your turn. Tell me something from your past." Jack's hand went to his chest, where a small silver locket hung beneath his shirt. He pulled it out, the chain catching the sunlight. "Catherine gave me this the day Emma was born." Elizabeth moved closer as he opened the locket, revealing a tiny photograph of a newborn Emma sleeping in her mother's arms. The image was slightly faded, but clearly cherished. "She's beautiful," Elizabeth said softly. "Both of them. Catherine always said Emma got her best features from her mom." Jack's voice held warmth beneath the sadness. "The curiosity, the way she sees the world as full of possibilities. And what did she get from you? The stubbornness, probably, the need to understand how things work." He closed the locket gently. "Catherine used to joke that between her literature and my mechanics, Emma would grow up either very well-rounded or very confused." Elizabeth picked up a stone, attempting her own skip across the water. It sank immediately, and she laughed at her failure. "I was terrible at this as a kid, too. My father tried to teach me, but I was always too focused on getting it perfect, instead of just enjoying the attempt." Still a perfectionist? Reformed? Or trying to be? She selected another stone. "The board thinks perfection means never making mistakes. My father knew it meant learning from them." This time, her stone skipped once before sinking. Her smile of triumph was so genuine, so unlike her CEO persona, that Jack felt something shift in his chest. "Tell me about him," he said. "Your father. The man behind the company." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "He built engines before he built companies. Started in his garage, just like you, even after Morgan Technologies. Went public, he kept a workbench in his office. Said it helped him remember what really mattered." "And what was that?" "Creating something real, something that helped people." She looked at Jack. "You remind me of him sometimes. The way you talk about engines, about understanding how things work." Jack touched the locket again, thinking of his own father's lessons about engines and life. "Sounds like they would have gotten along." "They would have." Elizabeth's voice softened. "He would have appreciated this whole adventure, actually. The unexpected repair, the spontaneous road trip. He always said the best opportunities come disguised as problems." A fish jumped in the lake, sending ripples across their reflections. Jack found himself studying Elizabeth's profile, seeing not the CEO, but the woman who still remembered how to skip stones with her father. "Catherine used to say something similar," he said, "that life's biggest gifts often come wrapped in unexpected packages." Elizabeth turned to face him, their shoulders almost touching on the log. "Like a broken fuel injector." "Like a broken fuel injector." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. The locket felt warm against Jack's chest, and for the first time since Catherine's passing, its presence felt like a blessing rather than just a memory. Elizabeth's hand found his, hesitant at first, then sure. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of light on water, listening to the wind in the pines. Two people from different worlds, finding common ground beside a mountain lake. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. "We should probably get going." "Probably," Jack agreed, but neither of them moved immediately. Sometimes, he realized, the journey matters more than the destination. When they did return to the car, something had changed. The space between them felt different, warmer, more familiar. The locket rested against Jack's chest, no longer a weight, but a reminder that the heart has an infinite capacity for new beginnings. The hand-painted sign caught Elizabeth's eye first. 52nd Annual Mountain Heritage Festival, next exit. a simple wooden board that somehow made her foot ease off the accelerator. "We shouldn't," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. Jack pulled a wrinkled flyer from the diner where they'd stopped for coffee. Local music, craft booths, homemade. Pie contest. Sounds terrible. His deadpan delivery made Elizabeth laugh. Absolutely dreadful. She flicked on the turn signal. We probably shouldn't waste our time. Probably not. But the Ferrari was already gliding down the exit ramp, its sophisticated engineering completely at odds with the dusty fairground parking lot they found themselves in. Local families in pickup trucks and minivans stared as Elizabeth parked between a weathered Ford and a vintage Chevy. The festival spread before them in a patchwork of colorful tents and stands. The aroma of barbecue and fresh-baked goods filled the air, mixing with the sound of fiddles and banjos from a small stage. My marketing team would have a fit if they saw me here, Elizabeth mused, accepting a paper cup of fresh lemonade from a freckled girl's stand. CEO of Morgan Technologies, drinking 60-cent lemonade at a country fair. Good thing they can't. See you then. They wandered through the craft booths, Elizabeth surprising herself by purchasing a hand-knitted scarf that would probably cost a fraction of her usual accessories. Jack found himself drawn to a woodworker's stand, admiring the craftsmanship of hand-carved toys. Emma would love this, he said, picking up a small carousel horse. Get it for her, Elizabeth encouraged. Every adventure needs a souvenir. The local band struck up a livelier tune, and couples began clearing space for dancing. Elizabeth watched them with poorly concealed interest. Don't tell me the CEO of Morgan Technologies knows how to square dance, Jack teased. Please, I went to finishing school. She turned to him with unexpected mischief in her eyes. I know every dance from waltz to foxtrot, though I'm a little rusty. Prove it! The challenge hung in the air between them for a moment. Then Elizabeth set down her lemonade cup. I will, if you will. They joined the dancers as the band swung into an old-fashioned waltz. Jack's hand found Elizabeth's waist, her fingers settled on his shoulder, and suddenly they were moving together as if they'd done this 100 times before. You're full of surprises, Elizabeth said as Jack guided her through a perfect turn. High school job. Helped the dance instructor set up her studio. She taught me the basics in return. His eyes held a hint of remembered joy. Catherine used to say I was the only mechanic in town who could fix a car and dance a waltz. They moved together through another turn, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. Elizabeth's corporate poise melted into something more genuine, more free. Around them the festival whirled in a blur of color and motion, but in their shared space, time seemed to slow. The waltz ended too soon, transitioning into a livelier country tune. But before they could step apart, Elizabeth's hand tightened on Jack's shoulder. One more? He pulled her closer as the fiddles sang. One more. Later, as the afternoon sun began to sink behind the mountains, they found themselves at a pie-tasting booth. Elizabeth's hair had come slightly loose from its perfect arrangement, and there was a smudge of cinnamon on Jack's shirt. Best detour ever, she declared, sampling a slice of apple pie that would put any five-star restaurant to shame. Jack watched her, seeing not the polished CEO, but a woman who had remembered how to find joy in simple pleasures. The festival flyer poked out of his pocket, a humble paper reminder that sometimes the best moments in life are the unplanned ones. As they walked back to the Ferrari, Elizabeth humming the waltz tune under her breath, Jack realized that the distance between their worlds had shrunk to the space of a dance step. The breaking news alert on Elizabeth's phone shattered their peaceful morning drive. She glanced at the screen, and Jack watched her features harden back into the CEO he'd first met. Pull over, she said quietly. Please. He guided the Ferrari into a scenic turnout, the morning sun painting the valley below in shades of promise that suddenly felt out of reach. Elizabeth was already scrolling through a business article, her free hand clenched tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Morgan. Technology's CEO Elizabeth Morgan's unexpected absence raises questions, she read aloud. Sources inside the company suggest her failure to appear at yesterday's crucial board meeting may indicate leadership instability. Jack waited, sensing she needed space to process. Finally, she looked up. They're suggesting I'm having a breakdown. That missing one meeting means I'm unfit to lead. One meeting. The quarterly board review. I rescheduled it when we started this trip. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Apparently that's tantamount to corporate treason. Her phone buzzed again, another news alert. Then another. The outside world was crashing in, demanding attention. There's more, she said, scrolling through messages. Problems at the garage. Jerry called. Mrs. Henderson's Volvo is making strange noises and he can't figure out why. He's worried about making it worse. The twin pressures of their separate lives pressed in on the small space they'd created together. Elizabeth's corporate world demanded its CEO back, while Jack's responsibilities pulled him toward home. I should call the board, Elizabeth said, but her hand didn't move toward the phone. Instead, she pulled up the article again, staring at its harsh headlines as if they might somehow soften. My father built this company from nothing, she said, quietly. 30 years of work, of innovation, of caring about more than just profit margins. And now they're acting like taking 3 days off is a sign of mental instability. Jack thought about the woman who'd danced with him at the festival, who'd bought handmade scarves and eaten pie with simple joy. Would your father have wanted you to live like this, always at their beck and call? Elizabeth paused, considering. No, he wouldn't. He used to say that the moment you become a slave to the business is the moment you lose the vision to lead it. Her phone buzzed. Again, and this time she turned it off completely. The silence that followed felt like both a victory and a question mark. What about Mrs. Henderson's car? She asked. Jerry's a good mechanic, but that Volvo's temperamental. It needs... Jack trailed off, remembering all the responsibilities waiting at home. Elizabeth watched him, understanding dawning in her eyes. It needs its mechanic, the one who knows its quirks. The moment stretched between them, reality intruding on their carefully constructed bubble of escape. The newspaper article glowed, accusingly on Elizabeth's phone screen, its headlines a reminder of the world they'd temporarily left behind. We knew this couldn't last forever, Jack said gently. Didn't we? Elizabeth's voice held a note of challenge. Who says we have to play by their rules? Who says a CEO can't take time to remember why she loved the work in the first place? She picked up her phone again, but instead of calling the board, she pulled up a photo from the festival, the two of them mid-dance, caught in a moment of perfect understanding. Look at this, she said. When was the last time either of us looked this happy, this real? Jack studied the photo, seeing what she meant. They looked like different people, unburdened, authentic, alive. The garage needs me, he said softly. And the company needs me, Elizabeth nodded. But maybe they need the real us, not just the roles we've been playing. The morning sun continued its climb, illuminating the valley below, where roads wound like possibilities. The business article still glowed on Elizabeth's phone, but somehow its urgency had diminished. So what do we do? Jack asked. Elizabeth looked at him, then out at the view, then back at the phone with its demanding headlines. We finish what we started, she said finally. We complete this journey, but maybe we start thinking about what comes after. The word after hung between them, full of both promise and uncertainty. Jack started the Ferrari's engine, its purr a counterpoint to their thoughts. They pulled back onto the road, carrying with them the weight of responsibilities, but also the lightness of possibility. Sometimes, Jack realized, reality's intrusion doesn't end the story. It just adds another chapter. They found a small roadside cafe for lunch, the kind of place that served breakfast all day, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The tension that had been building since the morning's news finally broke over a chipped ceramic mug. You don't, Understand, Elizabeth said, her voice tight. I can't just ignore the board. This isn't some small-town business where everyone knows everyone and deadlines are flexible. The words hit harder than she'd probably intended. Jack set his coffee, the cup down with careful precision. No, it's not a small-town business. It's a corporation where numbers matter more than people. That's not fair, isn't it? You spent the last 2 days talking about how the company's lost its way, how it's forgotten your father's values. But the minute they snap their fingers, don't. Elizabeth's knuckles whitened around her mug. Don't pretend you understand my world. You fix cars. I run a company that employs thousands of people. Their livelihoods depend on me making the right decisions. And what about your life? Does that matter at all in the grand corporate scheme? Elizabeth pushed back from the table abruptly. Her coffee cup tipped, dark liquid spreading across the formica surface like spilled possibilities. You think it's so simple? Just follow your heart, ignore responsibilities. Must be nice in that uncomplicated world of yours. Uncomplicated? Jack's laugh held no humor. Try raising a daughter alone while keeping a failing business afloat. Try explaining to an 8-year-old why Daddy can't make it to her school. Play because Mrs. Henderson's car needs fixing and we need the money. The broken pieces of Elizabeth's cup lay between them, like the shards of whatever they'd been building these past days. I shouldn't have come, Elizabeth said quietly. This whole trip was a mistake. Why? Because it showed you a life beyond quarterly reports? Because it made me think things could be different. The words burst out of her. Because for 2 days I felt like myself again, not just the CEO of Morgan Technologies, but it's not real, is it? This little escape of ours? Jack stood, throwing some bills on the table. Felt pretty real to me, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe you're exactly where you belong, in that corporate tower, surrounded by people who measure worth in stock prices. And you're exactly where you belong, in that little garage, fixing other people's problems, because you can't face your own. They stared at each other across the coffee-stained table, both shocked by the cruelty of their words. The cafe's other patrons studiously looked away, giving them the privacy to wound each other. I need some air, Jack said finally. Fine. He walked out into the parking lot. The mountain air that had seemed so fresh this morning, now bitter, in his lungs. The Ferrari sat gleaming in the sunlight, indifferent to the human drama unfolding around it. Inside, Elizabeth stared at the broken cup, at the coffee seeping into the paper napkins. A waitress appeared with a cloth, quietly cleaning up the mess. Been married long? The waitress asked, her tone suggesting she'd seen this scene before. It's not like that. Honey, I've been serving coffee for 30 years. I know something breaking when I see it. She paused in her wiping. Question is, are you going to sweep it up and throw it away or try to fix it? Elizabeth looked out the window to where Jack stood, his back to the cafe, shoulders rigid with hurt and anger. She thought about board meetings and quarterly reports, about mountain festivals and waltzes under open skies. I don't know if it can be fixed. Most things can, the waitress said, gathering the broken pieces, if you want them to be. Outside, Jack watched clouds gather over the mountains. He thought about Emma's card still in his pocket. Have a good adventure, Daddy. Some adventure, some escape. But even as the anger churned, he remembered Elizabeth's face while dancing, her laugh over diner pie, the way she'd listened, really listened, when he talked about engines and dreams. The cafe door chimed. Jack didn't turn, but he felt Elizabeth's presence behind him. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't mean... I know, me neither. They stood in silence, watching the clouds build. Sometimes broken things can't be mended, but sometimes the breaking is just part of finding a new way to fit together. They drove in silence as day faded into dusk, the Ferrari eating up miles, while the space between them felt like a chasm. Elizabeth had taken the wheel again, her movements precise but mechanical, as if she was operating machinery rather than driving a car she loved. The Grand Canyon appeared first as a suggestion of emptiness on the horizon, then as a vast darkness that swallowed the stars. They found a small lodge on the rim, checking into separate rooms without discussion. The night stretched long and sleepless for both of them. Jack's phone buzzed at 4 a.m., a text from Elizabeth. "Meet me at the rim before sunrise." He found her at a viewpoint just east of the lodge, wrapped in her new handmade scarf against the pre-dawn chill. The canyon was still invisible, a void waiting for light to give it form. "I couldn't sleep," she said as he approached. "Kept thinking about what that waitress said about broken things, the one with the coffee cup. She asked if we were going to sweep it up or try to fix it." Elizabeth turned to face him. "I've been sweeping things away my whole life. Problems, feelings, anything that complicated the narrative." The first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, a pale luminescence that barely suggested what was to come. "My father used to say that the most important moments in life happen in the dark," Jack said quietly. "When you can't see the path ahead, but you take the step anyway." Is that what we're doing here? Taking steps in the dark? Maybe. Or maybe we're just two people who forgot how to be anything except what others needed us to be. The light strengthened, beginning to reveal the canyon's depths. Colors emerged from shadow, reds, golds, purples, layered like time itself. "I was wrong," Elizabeth said, "about your world being uncomplicated, about any of this being simple. I was wrong. Too, about you just being a corporate puppet, about understanding what you carry." The sun's first direct ray struck the canyon's far rim, igniting the rock face like a flame. Elizabeth caught her breath at the transformation. "Look at that," she whispered. "All those layers built up over millions of years, each one telling its own story, each one shaped by what came before," Jack added, understanding what she meant, "but still becoming something new." They watched in silence as the sun painted the canyon in morning glory, shadow and light dancing across depths that had waited eons for this particular dawn. "I don't want to go back to who I was," Elizabeth said finally, "to what I was." "Then don't." She turned to him, her face softened by the morning light. "Is it that simple?" "No, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to have it all figured out." Jack stepped closer, close enough to see the sunrise reflected in her eyes. "Maybe we're just supposed to be brave enough to try something new. Like a CEO who remembers how to dance? Like a mechanic who dreams bigger than his garage." The sun cleared the horizon fully now, flooding the canyon with light that revealed every crag and crevice, every shadow and possibility. Elizabeth's hand found Jack's, their fingers intertwining with the naturalness of puzzle pieces finding their fit. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for what I said about your garage, about fixing other people's problems. I'm sorry, too, for judging your world without understanding it." She squeezed his hand. "Maybe that's what this whole journey has been about. Understanding each other's worlds. And maybe finding a new one." The question hung between them like the morning mist in the canyon below. Then Elizabeth turned to face him fully, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, where Emma's locket lay beneath his shirt. "Maybe," she whispered, and then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, and the sun wrapped them in light that made everything old feel new again. When they finally drew apart, the day was fully born around them. Below, the canyon stretched away to the horizon, its paths winding like possibilities. "So what now?" Elizabeth asked, but her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Now we finish what we started. Together." They stayed at the rim until the morning tour buses began arriving, breaking their private moment. But as they walked back to the Ferrari, hands still linked, they carried the sunrise with them, a reminder that even the deepest canyons can be bridged by morning light. The California coast appeared on the horizon like a promise, sunlight glinting off the Pacific. Elizabeth eased the Ferrari onto a scenic overlook, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching waves break far below. "I've been thinking," she said finally, pulling 2 plane tickets from her bag, "about the return journey." Jack took the tickets, noting the first-class designation. "That's quite an upgrade from my usual travel arrangements." I thought, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I thought we could fly back together. Give us time to figure things out before reality crashes back in. The tickets lay between them like a bridge between their worlds, or perhaps a question mark. And what exactly are we figuring out? Jack asked softly. Elizabeth turned in her seat to face him fully. I've been making calls. The board isn't happy, but they're listening. I'm proposing a restructuring of the company, getting back to my father's original vision, innovation with purpose, not just profit. And how does that work? We expand our green energy division, focus on sustainable technology, community development. She smiled slightly. Maybe even a program to help independent garages upgrade their equipment for working on electric vehicles. Jack raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't happen to know any independent garage owners, would you? One or two. Her smile faded into seriousness. But that's just the business side. There's us to consider. Us. The word hung in the air, full of possibility and complication. I can't leave the company, Elizabeth said. Not completely. But I can change how I run it, work remotely more often, delegate the things that don't need my direct attention. And I can't leave the garage, Jack replied. It's not just my business. It's my father's legacy, Emma's future. I know. Elizabeth reached for his hand. I'm not asking you to. She pulled out her tablet, showing him property listings in his town. The old Wilson factory on the edge of town, Morgan Technologies, is interested in converting it into a green energy research facility. We'd need someone local to oversee the mechanical side of things, someone who understands both the technical aspects and the community. Jack studied her face. You've been planning this? Planning implies certainty. I'm exploring possibilities. She squeezed his hand. The question is, are you interested in exploring them with me? The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and change. Jack thought about Emma, about his garage, about the way Elizabeth's world had expanded his own. It won't be easy, he said, merging our worlds. Nothing worth doing ever is. She touched the plane tickets lightly. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to build something new, not just choose between what exists. Jack pulled out his phone, showing her a text from Emma. A photo of a science project she'd built, all gears and circuits. She's going to love having you around. She already thinks you're some kind of superhero after I told her about the Ferrari. Think she'd like to learn about running a company someday? After she masters mechanics, of course. The future stretched. Before them, like the coastal highway, full of curves and challenges, but also beautiful possibilities. So, Elizabeth said, picking up the plane tickets. What do you say? Ready for another journey? Jack leaned across the console and kissed her, tasting salt air and promise on her lips. With you? Always. They sat there a while longer, watching the waves and planning. Not just the flight home, but the harder journey of merging two lives, two worlds, two sets of responsibilities into something new. The Ferrari purred to life again, ready for the final stretch to San Francisco. As they pulled back onto the coastal highway, Jack noticed Elizabeth's hand had found his again, their fingers intertwined like the threads of the story they were beginning to write together. The plane tickets rested in the console between them. No longer just paper and promises, but a first step toward whatever came next. San Francisco stretched before them, the Golden Gate Bridge glowing in the late afternoon sun. Elizabeth guided the Ferrari through familiar streets until they reached Morgan Technologies' headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky. Home, sweet home, she said. But there was a new note in her voice, as if the words didn't fit quite right anymore. In the underground parking garage, their footsteps echoed as they walked past rows of luxury vehicles. To the private elevator, Jack noticed how Elizabeth's posture changed subtly, shoulders squaring, chin lifting, as if putting on armor for battle. The board's waiting, she said, pulling a folder from her briefcase. Inside was a deed, the garage's deed, which she'd had her lawyers pull while they were driving. But before we go up, we need to talk about this. Jack took the document, immediately recognizing his father's signature at the bottom. "Why do you have this?" "Because I'm about to propose something crazy to the board, and I need to know you're with me." She touched the deed gently. "Your garage isn't just a business, Jack. It's a legacy. I understand that now, so instead of buying you out or making you part of Morgan Technologies, I want to propose a partnership." "What kind of partnership?" "Morgan Technologies provides the funding and equipment to modernize your garage, make it our flagship independent service center for electric and hybrid vehicles. But you maintain complete ownership and control. We're partners, not owners." Jack studied the deed, thinking of his father's dreams for the garage, and the research facility, a separate project. "You'd oversee it because you're the best person for the job, not because of us." She stepped closer. "I don't want to change your world, Jack. I want to help it grow." The elevator dinged, but neither moved toward it. "What about your world?" Jack asked. "The board won't like their CEO splitting time between San Francisco and a small-town garage." Elizabeth smiled, a hint of her father's determination in her eyes. "The board works for the company, not the other way around. Besides, they're about to learn that Morgan Technologies is returning to its roots. Innovation that serves communities, not just shareholders." She pulled out another document, a business plan that merged her corporate expertise with his practical knowledge, a vision of future where both their worlds could thrive. "It won't be easy," she warned. "There'll be resistance, complications. Like trying to explain to Emma why her homework needs to be done, even though her potential stepmother owns a Ferrari." The word stepmother hung in the air between them, making Elizabeth's breath catch. Is that something you've thought about?" Jack took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with her manicured ones. "I've thought about a lot of things since a broken fuel injector brought you into my garage." The elevator dinged again, more insistent this time. The board was waiting, but for once in her career, Elizabeth didn't feel the usual urgency to answer their summons. "So," she said softly, "are we doing this? All of it?" Jack looked at the deed, then at the woman who had driven into his life, and changed everything, on one condition. "Name it. We keep the sign as it is, Miller & Son Auto Repair, but maybe we add something underneath. A Morgan Technologies partner." Elizabeth's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Perfect, though eventually we might need to consider Miller and Daughter." "Emma would love that." "I meant our daughter. You know, hypothetically." "Eventually." Jack pulled her close, kissing her in the echoing concrete cavern of the parking garage, surrounded by luxury cars that suddenly seemed less important than the future they were choosing. When they finally stepped into the elevator, the deed was safely tucked away, and their hands were still clasped. Elizabeth pressed the button for the top floor, where the board waited. "Ready?" she asked. Jack squeezed her hand. "Ready?" The elevator began its ascent, carrying them toward whatever came next. They had chosen their path, not his world or hers, but something new they would build together. The familiar sight of Miller & Son Auto Repair appeared around the bend, but this time the Ferraris' approach drew a small, welcoming committee. Emma stood bouncing on her toes beside Aunt Sarah, and even Mrs. Henderson had come out to witness the return of their prodigal mechanic. Elizabeth pulled into the garage with the same precision she'd shown that first morning, but now the space felt different. Not just a random stop on her journey, but the beginning of something permanent. Emma launched herself at Jack the moment he stepped out of the car. "Daddy, did you have a good adventure? Did you take pictures? Can I see the mountains?" Over his daughter's head, Jack caught Elizabeth's smile. Tender, a little nervous, but real. They'd agreed she would stay in town for a few days, getting to know Emma better while they worked out the details of their new arrangement. "I brought someone back with me," Jack said, setting Emma down. "Remember Elizabeth, the lady with the Ferrari?" Emma studied Elizabeth with undisguised curiosity. "Are you going to be Daddy's girlfriend now?" Sarah unsuccessfully stifled a laugh, while Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. Elizabeth knelt to Emma's level, reaching into her bag. "Actually, I brought you something." She pulled out a small box. "Your dad told me you like to understand how things work." Inside was a set of keys. Not just any keys, but an antique set that had belonged to Elizabeth's father. "These opened the first Morgan Technologies workshop," she explained. "Dad kept them to remind himself where we came from. I thought maybe you'd like to start your own collection." Emma held the keys reverently. "Did they fix cars there too?" "They built things, special things that help people." Elizabeth glanced at Jack. "Just like your dad does." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her kind face wrinkled with pleasure. "Well, I for one am glad you're back, Jack. That nice Jerry fellow tried his best. With my Volvo, but—" She turned to Elizabeth. "You'll have to get used to sharing him, dear. Half the town depends on him." "I'm counting on it," Elizabeth replied. "That's part of why I fell in love with him." The words slipped out naturally, as if she'd been saying them for years, instead of for the first time. Jack's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Sarah, ever the practical one, herded everyone inside for the welcome home dinner she'd prepared. The small apartment above the garage had never held so many people, but somehow they all fit. Emma showing, Elizabeth her room, Mrs. Henderson fussing over the food, Sarah watching it all with quiet satisfaction. Later, after Emma was in bed and their guests had gone home, Jack and Elizabeth stood in the garage. The Ferrari gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but now it was just a car. Beautiful, but not as beautiful as the future it had helped them find. "So," Elizabeth said, fingering the apartment keys she'd been given, "think you can get used to having a CEO around the place? Think you can get used to small-town life, at least part-time?" She looked around the garage, seeing not its limitations but its potential. "I think I'm already home." The keys jingled softly as Jack pulled her close. Through the office window, they could see the garage's sign, still lit despite the late hour. Soon it would carry the additional line about Morgan Technologies. But for now, it was exactly as his father had left it. "Welcome home," he whispered, and kissed her. Upstairs, Emma's collection of keys lay on her bedside table, the Morgan Technologies originals now central to her display. They caught the moonlight through her window, gleaming like possibilities. Tomorrow would bring challenges, merging their lives, explaining their choices to the board, beginning the careful dance of becoming a family. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The garage that had been Jack's anchor now felt like a launching pad, and the woman who had driven into his life looking for a quick fix had found something far more valuable, a future worth building, one day at a time. 1 year later, the photographer adjusted her tripod one final time, centering the lens on the newly renovated Miller & Son Auto Repair. The building gleamed in the morning sun, its classic facade preserved but enhanced, much like everything else about the business. "Ready for the family photo?" she called out. Elizabeth emerged from the office, where she'd been on a video call with the board. These days, she split her time between San Francisco and the garage, running Morgan Technologies with a new perspective that had actually improved both profits and innovation. Jack stepped out from under a Tesla he'd been servicing, wiping his hands on a shop rag. The garage now handled everything from Mrs. Henderson's faithful Volvo to the latest electric vehicles, thanks to equipment that rivaled any luxury dealer's service center. Emma darted out last, wearing overalls that matched her father's, a ring of keys jangling at her belt. At 9, she was already showing an aptitude for both mechanics and business that made both her parents proud. The family gathered in front of the sign, which now read, "Miller & Son Auto Repair, a Morgan Technologies partner family-owned, since 1975. "Scoot closer together," the photographer instructed. "That's it. Now this is for the company's annual report." "And our family album," Elizabeth said, her hand finding Jack's. The diamond on her left hand caught the sunlight, a recent addition that had prompted celebration throughout the town. The Morgan Technologies Green Energy Research Facility on the edge of town had transformed the local economy, providing jobs and opportunities while staying true to the community's character. Jack oversaw the mechanical division, his practical expertise proving invaluable in turning innovative ideas into working solutions. Mrs. Henderson appeared just as the photographer was ready to shoot. "Oh, good! I haven't missed it." She joined them without invitation, as comfortable with the CEO of Morgan Technologies as she'd always been with her trusted mechanic. "We want you in it, Mrs. H," Emma insisted. "Your family too." Elizabeth nodded. These days, the lines between corporate life and community, between business and family, had blurred in the most beautiful ways. The photographer snapped several shots, capturing not just poses, but genuine moments. Jack showing Emma how to hold a wrench just right. Elizabeth laughing at something Mrs. Henderson said, the proud sign above them all. Later that evening, after Mrs. Henderson had gone home with her Volvo running smoother than ever, the family sat in their expanded apartment above the garage. The walls now held both corporate awards and Emma's school artwork, family photos, and business achievements, sharing space as naturally as their lives had merged. "The board loved the new community outreach program," Elizabeth said, curled against Jack on the couch. "We're expanding it to other small towns." "Mom said I can come to the next board meeting," Emma announced proudly. She'd started calling Elizabeth Mom 6 months ago, as naturally as breathing. "After you finish your science project," Jack reminded her. Speaking of which, Emma pulled out her latest creation, a miniature electric engine she'd built herself. "Can we test it in the garage, please?" They headed downstairs, their footsteps echoing through the space that had witnessed the beginning of their story. The Ferrari still visited occasionally, though these days it shared garage space with a more practical family car. Jack watched his daughter and wife huddle over the tiny engine, both faces lit with the same curiosity and determination. Outside, the sun was setting on another day in a life that had turned out better than any of them could have planned. The family photo would soon hang both here and in the Morgan Technologies boardroom, a reminder that sometimes the best innovations aren't technological at all. Sometimes they're about finding new ways to bring people together, to